Welcome back, Matt, to another episode of What Next?
Good morning. Lovely, sunny London late spring morning. Good to see you, James.
Good to see you. I had a good one I wanted to talk about today. A few days ago, I put up a LinkedIn post about the post was something along the lines of don't anchor yourself to a framework or a language as an engineer, as opposed to saying, I'm seeing yourself as a full stack engineer or a product engineer as opposed to a React dev. It definitely resonated with a lot of people. A lot of people liked it. There was definitely some that didn't like it, and there was some that probably partially agreed but wanted to clarify, including yourself. So I guess I want to talk about that today. And do you think that engineers get too attached to frameworks, and does that hold them back?
Okay, an awful lot to unpack there, and I just want to draw attention to your spelling mistake in that post as well, which I thought was very amusing, spelling the word engineer wrong, uh, which I noticed someone called out in the comments. But
They
it's funny
did.
that
I did like
it's
that.
one of those things where you look at something and you look at it for hours and hours and hours, and you don't see it. You just sort of see what you want to see, right? Which I
I
think
was
is
surprised. I was very surprised that got picked up, because obviously I generated that image on ChatGPT, but I didn't notice it, and someone did. So kudos to them.
very interesting. So anyway, it's a good lesson in seeing what you want to see versus seeing what's actually there.
Mm.
But look, so you asked a bunch of really good questions there. So the first thing, like my natural instinct to this, and which is why I kind of pushed back and said your post was a bit controversial, because I think you were, the way I interpreted it is you were drawing a distinction that probably wasn't there in your original post, which was that the language doesn't matter. And actually, I don't think that's what you were saying at all, right? Because
No.
I think the language does matter, if that's depending on the question you're asking, right? So some things you can do in some languages, it's a lot harder to do in other languages, and so there is a material difference there. But I concede that wasn't the point you were making. The point you were making was, do engineers get too attached to a language? And I, as we were just talking in the prep here a second ago, I want to push back on you, not you personally, but you as in the representative of the recruitment community. And I think quite often the
Oh,
tendency to the tendency to focus on a line item view of the technology is a bit of a pathology in
mm,
in the recruitment business, and also with some hiring managers, right? Because often you'll see it. I think that, to be fair to recruiters, they're probably reflecting the brief that they've been given, and so they are looking for those line item. But what I would say, like to answer your question straight up, I think as an engineer, what you want to be doing is you want to be riding above the tech and the frameworks a little bit, to the extent that you can. But it really does depend on where you are in your career. So if you're starting out and you're an IC and you want to be the best IC that you possibly can, then of course it makes sense to try and get access to some of the tech and be as good as you can with it. But if I were a little bit further on in my career, then maybe what the thing that I want to be demonstrating to potential hirers is that I have a meta learning and metacognition, and I can learn how to learn. And my approach to technology is actually, well, it depends on the problem I'm solving. And sometimes you would use this technology, sometimes you would use that technology, and be able to demonstrate to a hirer how you've made those trade-offs in real life. Because using JavaScript to solve every single problem is probably not going to give you the best outcomes any more than using Java to solve every problem is going to give you the best outcomes. There are certain tools that are much better than others, and frameworks that are much better than others for solving different kinds of problems. So I think,
yep.
to answer your first question, do engineers get too attached to specific tools and frameworks? I think they do, but I think it's a bit of a pathology in the industry, and I think so. We can talk about what to do differently, but it is a bit of a pathology. There's both push and pull to that question.
Yep.
That gets us to the point where
Yeah, and I don't want people to think that, certainly in that post, but that framework should be the enemy either. Like, I expect to see as a recruiter, I expect to see what you've been working with, and of course, a lot of the time it's a real advantage if you have been using that framework or that language. Like, what signals are you looking for to see if they are someone who, just relies on this framework or this language and then can't do anything else, or they actually probably have a lot more to offer, but maybe they just haven't positioned themselves very well? Like, what do you look for as a hiring manager?
Look, React's an interesting one. As you know, as you know, and I think we've discussed before, I'm famously not very good at the front end and never have been. So I'm much more of a back end programmer.
We can use back end
so,
as an example. It doesn't
no,
matter.
no, no. But I actually want to use, because I've obviously managed folks on the front end as well, and led the teams with front enders, and I've been working myself recently on a whole bunch of front end stuff, right? So I definitely have some sympathy for it. But one of the things I see is, do they have a kind of normative view of the world? Right, and is like React's the only answer, or there's a particular normative, like just like the one size fits all kind of approach to it. What would be interesting to look out for is, well, have they run up against the limitations of that framework in its use, and what did they do in that case? So I just hacked around until I got it working, right? Or this particular piece, and particularly with JavaScript front end and React, like the tech stack there now on the front end is so complicated, and I mean complicated is in so many moving parts. Like no individual bit is that complex, but there's just lots and lots and lots of moving parts. So you have to know a lot of how bits plug together. And I think anyone who's used it in anger in any way will have come up against its boundaries or its constraints. And that's what's interesting. Back to one of our themes about boundary conditions. What do you do when you're on the edge of something? And how do you react? Pardon the pun. How do you react to that boundary condition? Right. So, did they go, well, we actually tried to do this and it didn't work, and so then we did this, or that's what I'm looking out for. And what I don't want to hear is the sort of, oh, but that never happened. Because that tells me that, they probably weren't pushing the boundaries, or they really weren't exploring the possibilities of what it could do.
Okay. From the recruitment side, and I can't speak for every recruiter, but when I look through someone's experience, like let's just say I want to see a framework or a language, all I really look for is, have they been using it? Whether they list it as a technology on their current role, or they list it, one of their tools that they've got experience with. And then I'm looking for deeper things. So in their description or achievements, that they use React. Like I don't see that as an achievement. Whereas I'm really looking for, what is the problem that they solved, or what did they do? Because once I get beyond, okay, they've used React, great. It might say they've used it for a few years, which I guess is a good sign. But for me, that's what I look for. Would you be, if you were looking at a CV, are you looking at that kind of thing as well? Are you like, how do you, or maybe in an interview, how do you extract that?
Yeah, I think, look, let me loop back onto the first question very briefly, because it feeds into this. So I think it depends on the question you're asking. So am I hiring a contractor to solve a particular problem? Do I have a code base, an existing code base? Do I want someone to come in who's really demonstrably very good at React code bases and has done this and that, and you can see the evidence of it? Or am I looking to hire a full-time employee, or bring on even a co-founder, right? Whatever level you might be at. In that case, you're sort of asking very, very different questions. And so I think in the first case,
good point,
you really want to, it's hard to do it in a resume, but I think what you want to see is like, I did this, and you talk about the outcomes, so using this technology, we got this outcome. That's much more interesting. Just simply saying React 5 years or whatever, that's much less interesting. But if I got to the point where I'm talking to the person as opposed to just reading the resume, this is where it becomes very important, because the main question I'm interested in that situation is why. Why did you use this technology? And what was it about the problem that led you to the conclusion that this was the right answer? And did your prediction about what the right answer was going to be, did that play out? So did it actually work out for you as you expected? And what I'm looking for there is, I'm looking for an understanding of the why as much as the how.
So what if the why is, that's because our organization is using React and therefore we always use React? Or is that valid? Like, is it easy to go from, because unless you're right up the top of the chain, I guess you're not necessarily making those decisions, are you?
Well, no, I think that's a perfectly valid point of view to take. And then my question is, okay, so what if, where have you bumped up against the edges of it? Where has it worked for you or not worked for you? And then what that tells me is like, this person really understands the why of this thing, this technology, and not just the what. Right? Or maybe just the how. Yeah, maybe just the how.
I imagine it's not that straightforward to just change to a different framework or language, when something is more complicated. Is it that straightforward?
In an existing code base, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. These decisions get locked in pretty early. Look, this is kind of old sort of basic adage that I use about backends being deep but narrow. Right, so they tend to be complex often, but the interface that they present to the outside world is typically quite narrow. And if you're doing it properly, it doesn't change that much, right? Whereas the front end is the opposite. So they tend to be wide and shallow and complicated in the sense that they have many pieces. Okay.
Yes.
And so that difference is that sort of T shape. It's not really T shape like T-shaped person, but it's a kind of, you can conceptually think of it like a T shape. That sort of should instruct you on the kind of decisions you're making. And so changing the front end architecture, like changing React for Vue or something on the front end, is a pretty big change. And there's very limited customer value in that in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you make a decision like we're going to use React or we're going to use Vue or we're going to use Phoenix coming from the Elixir world, you're pretty much locking yourself into that for a period of time, notwithstanding some other really big sort of externalities that might hit you. Like you got acquired by a company who doesn't use that technology and now you have to move to their tech, those kind of things. But generally speaking, a change from, say, React to Vue, it's hard to justify it on an existing code base. You can always do it as a migration. So you're doing the next version of something and you're going to sort of flick out onto something else. But I think these kinds of decisions get locked in very early.
Okay.
And they're hard to change.
Do you think with the changes in technology, so we've got AI now, we know it can do a lot of coding for us. Do you think there's less value in being an expert in a particular language, or there's more value in being an expert in a particular language?
Oh, do we have time for this question? So let's do two things. I'll give you a quick answer, but I think this is a whole topic on itself, right? So
okay.
I'll tell you what I think, right? And then we can come back and later in another episode and talk about why I think that. So my personal view is that these technologies are massive weapons and they're massive multipliers of capability. So if you're fantastic, their ability to multiply your capabilities is extraordinary. Right? If you're a Muppet, their ability to multiply your muppetness is profound as well. So if you don't know what you're doing, then you can magnify by 10 or 100 times the degree to which you don't know what you're doing by using these technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So to your point, they are very, very useful for skilled people and very, very dangerous for unskilled people.
Yep. I can imagine that.
We can talk about why in detail.
Right. Amazing. I think let's leave it there, but maybe we pick up the hot debate in your world. I know is the T-shape engineer. You mentioned to me recently something that you it didn't sound like you liked the term. So maybe that's something we can pick up on a future episode. Yep. But thanks for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks, James.
Cheers.